So if you have your computers, you can open them up to Google Classroom, and we're going to be looking at some stuff today. We are going to go over the exam. The AP exam, and we're going to look at some thinking skills, and we're just going to kind of get an overview of the class. If you go to Google Classroom, you will see historic thinking skills right here. I just added that, and so you'll probably want to open it. Let me find it for me. It's called historical thinking skills. So we're going to talk about some of the skills, but before we get to that, let's go back to the course and exam description, and let's talk about, let me go to the exam. I want to talk to you about the exam itself. Here we go. Okay. The AP exam, and this is in that course exam description that you can download. And we're going to talk about the AP exam. And here it is. This is what the AP exam is going to include. It will be on May 12th at 8 a.m. in the Raider Room. It will include 55 multiple choice questions. These multiple choice questions are not like any you've had before. So they won't say, in what year did Columbus sail the ocean blue, A, B, C, D. It won't be that kind of question. It'll be much more detailed. There will be a paragraph known as a prompt or a picture or a chart or a map. These are called prompts. And then you will respond to the prompt. Some of the prompts are primary sources, like it's a document written in 1412. Some of it is a secondary source, that is, it's written by a history teacher in 1989. And then you will have to think about it and say, here's what I think the best answer is. Some of them are real easy, some of them are not. Okay, let's look at it. There are 55 questions, and you have 55 minutes to complete them. So how long do you have on each question, math majors? 1 minute, approximately. Now, what you will see is you will have a prompt, a little paragraph here, and then you might have question 1, 2, and 3 are all answered with the same one. So you're going to have to read that paragraph and then answer the 3 questions. And then you might have a map, and questions 4 and 5 are related to it. You usually don't have one prompt per question. So you can't be real mechanical and say, okay, I've got 1 minute on this question, because it's going to take you longer to read the paragraph, but then you've got to divide the answer. This one and this one, you won't have to read it. You will have already read it. Does that make sense? So on average, you have 1 minute. Last year, starting at the very beginning, my students started taking multiple choice questions from my AP, and they had a hard time with it. In fact, very few of them even finished the AP multiple choice, but when they actually got to the exam, they were ready for it. So we'll be taking these all year long, these multiple choice questions. Notice they take up 40% of your score. So you could make 100%, and that gets you in a good thing. And you remember I told you the AP scores are either 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And if you get a 3, 4, or 5, you're going to get college credit for the class. That's your goal, 3, 4, or 5. So you could make 100% on that and still not pass it. Or you could get half of them and still get a 3. Depends on how you do in your writing. And then there are 3 short answer questions. A short answer question is a question that you write to answer. You don't have to have a thesis. You just answer it. And every short answer question has an A, B, and a C. And so they'll ask you, question 1 will have an A, B, and C, and you get 1 point for each one. So you have 4 possible scores. A 3, you got all of them right. A 2, a 1, or a 0. So you can either get a 0, 1, 2, or 3 on each of these questions. And they are worth 20% of your score. That is the first part of the test. You notice that it will take 55 and 40 minutes. That's 90 minutes. That's an hour and a half plus. And then you will take a break, go to the restroom, come back. that book will be gone. You'll get another book that's for writing, so you can't go back. And they won't let you, once you get to the short answer, you can't go back and change the multiple choice. However, when you get to these last two essays, you can work on both of them however you want to. But these first two, it's just like the ACT. You can't go back. Okay? The first two questions are primary or secondary, the first two short answers. A secondary source, can you tell me the difference between the primary and secondary source? Yes?
Primary was like written by that, so like you said, a document from 1492. But secondary would be, let's say, if someone wrote, let's say, a novel based off of that document.
Right, or here's a textbook written and it's got information about 1492. However, look in the middle of this. Here I am right here. Here's a picture of a person named La Sultana Rosa dating 1550. That picture could be a primary source, even though it's in a textbook. Most history books are secondary because they're what somebody wrote about something. Do you see? A primary source is a source directly related to an event. A secondary source is if someone talks about an event or talks about a document related to the event. Okay? So in other words, if you had a picture dating 1550 and somebody wrote an analysis of the picture is the primary source, the analysis is the secondary source. Does that make sense? So your first one is going to be probably written by a historian, or it's going to be a chart or a map that's talking about an event in history. The second one is probably going to be an old document, either an old picture or a paragraph from 1400. And you'll have to answer 3 questions. No thesis, no essay, 3 questions. Have to write in complete sentences. If you just say, let's just say the question is, who was the first king that used English, and you say King George, you're not going to get credit because it's got to be a complete sentence. You have to say, the first king to use English was King George, which I just made that up. But it has to be a complete sentence, okay? And we'll talk more about that. And then you get 2 more questions, and you get to pick one of them. And they don't have a stimulus. They're just a question like I just asked. They're just a question that you would ask, answer the A, B, and C. And you look at them and you say, okay, I like this one better, or I like this one better. You pick the one you know the most about. By the way, AP does not give you credit for trying a harder question. So if there's a question everybody knows and you pick one nobody knows and you miss it, you still miss it. You're not going to impress the reader by going, oh, he tried this one or she did this one. You just, if there's 2 questions, you know one of them, not the other, get the one you know. And you get the right answer. AP is really clever about this. They don't count off for grammar. They don't count off for wrong answers. So you can have an essay or a short answer that's full of wrong answers, but also has the right answers. They count the right answers. In fact, you could have an A, B, C, and you get A completely wrong, you get B completely wrong, but in C, you somehow accidentally answer A and B, you'll get credit for all 3. So they're trying to give you every point they can. As long as you write in complete sentences and you answer it, you're going to get credit for it. Okay? Then, and I'll show you in a minute, then we have 2 essays. One is called a long essay, and the other is called a document-based essay. The document-based essay is an essay that has a very specific question prompt, and then it has 7 documents that are included for you to use to answer the question. I look at it like this. It's like doing a research paper where someone has already done the research and found the evidence for you. So this is a skill set where you learn how to use the evidence in the documents. All right? I'm going to go ahead and start telling you now, you never use the word document. You don't use the documents. You use the evidence in the documents. Do y'all see that? So if you write a paper and it's got a footnote, up in the paper you don't say, this document says, you say, this evidence is, and then you cite it down there. These documents are evidence. In fact, when you write your paper, if you say document 1, I will count off. Because you're not saying document 1, you're saying the evidence from document 1. We'll get more into that. Okay, I'm going to show you an example of that in just a minute. These essays tend to be more detailed. They are not stuff you could know just up in your head, but you don't have to know it because there's 7 documents. What you have to do, and it gives you 60 minutes to write it, you need to take 15 minutes and figure out what you're going to write. So you take 15 minutes, read the documents, group them. This one says this one says this. I think this evidence states this way, or I think that did you get it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's a brand new one.
Yeah, I think so.
That's good. So you get the evidence, you figure it out, you come up with a thesis, and then you start writing. And most people take 15 minutes and then 45 minutes. You can't just start writing. Nobody's that smart. You have to read the documents, figure out where you're going with it. Okay? And then the next one is a long essay, and there are 3 of these, and you pick any one of them. So you're gonna, and they're different time periods, or they're different countries. Be a similar question, and then you'll have to go to look at those and say, I like this one or this one or this one. You just pick one and go for it, and you've got 40 minutes. Now, this hour you have here, this 100 minutes that you have here, is all packaged together. Your prompter is not going to say, okay, you've got 40 minutes left, so you really need to keep an eye on the time. So you'll have to work on this, and over the year we will go through this. We'll do some samples where we work on an essay. And in fact, the fact that these are 60 minutes, there will be days where we will spend one day working on the prep. You'll come the next day and just start writing and write the whole hour. And we'll get that done. See you, Shep. Where are you going now?
Anatomy and physiology.
Okay. Who is that, Miss?
Westbrook, I think.
Oh, Coach Westbrook. Tell him you got the computer.
Yeah.
If he has any questions, tell him to call me.
Alright.
I'll ignore him because my phone's been recording. Anyway, so then you have the essay. The essays are much more broad because you got to know the stuff in your brain. Okay? So how long is this going to be? Figure this out for me. Somebody do the math. You have 40 minutes, 60 minutes, 40 minutes, 55 minutes.
3 hours, 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's a long essay. As long as the ACT. So you just got to get ready for it. Okay? Now, let's talk about some of the content for this exam. We did this yesterday, the 6 themes. And this is their technical name, and there's actually a long illustration or description of what each one is. So we have the humans and the environment, and what are the 2 ways that works? I told you this yesterday. How does the environment work? There's 2 things that it does. You remember? How does the environment affect humans? And then what's the other one? How do humans affect the environment? How environment affects humans? If you live on the Gulf Coast and you live down by New Orleans, you have to deal with hurricanes, right? If you live in this part of the country, you deal with tornadoes. We don't really deal with hurricanes, not much. But if you live in Kentucky, you don't ever deal with hurricanes. The environment affects you. On the other hand, you can affect the environment by, like, if you have a war and you just destroy a whole region, it's going to take a long time for it to build back. Environment. Cultural development interactions, usually AP is talking about religion. Sometimes they'll discuss architecture or art or ways of life, but generally speaking, it's 90% religion. The governance is the political, and this is decisions that affect empire or state building and state sustaining and ultimately state destruction. So, for example, can you name any empire that has not fallen? So far, the Chinese have not. Now, they've come and gone, and they've been through different dynasties, and they're still around. They're probably the longest country in the world that's still doing this. Can you think of another empire that hasn't fallen?
Maybe Japanese.
Japanese?
German.
German? How about America?
Oh.
Yeah. What about Great Britain? Great Britain rose and fall. They're still around, not as powerful. America so far hasn't fallen. What could cause an empire to fall? We will talk about that. I would say, generally speaking, in AP, you would say that there were internal problems and external problems that cause an empire to fall. What could be some internal problems?
Civil War.
Civil war, social unrest, overtaxing, extended, too much slavery, corruption. What could be an external conflict?
Lack of resources.
Enemies coming in, things like that. Okay, so then the economic systems are ways that people get and spend money and how they utilize it. And we'll talk more about that. And then social interactions, we talked about that. That's women's rights, LGBTQ rights, rich, poor, etc. And then technology innovation are the things that we use to accomplish things. So these are the 6 ways of looking. You will need to know these. You will see these on the test soon. So you're going to need to know them. Let me see if I can pull up that thing that I found. I hope I have it. I'm going to have to go over here. No, that's not it. Oh, there it is. Okay. There are 2 ways to remember these 6. I don't care for the first one because, well, actually, I don't care for either one of them, but you can use pieces, political, innovation, economics, cultural, environmental, social, or SPICE T. Interaction of the environment is kind of the weakest part of it. I'll put these in Google Classroom. But they are just an acronym to help you remember these 6. So it wouldn't hurt. Pieces is good, remember, because innovation is technology. That probably is a good one, pieces. SPICE T is good. Although interaction of the environment might, you got to remember it. So you'll need to know these 6 items. Okay, so now we are going to look at, in general, the units for AP World History. And you're going to need to know these for the exam. AP is divided into 9 units. Each unit has a different topic, but they are divided into 4 time periods. And these time periods reflect changes in the world at this point. So from 1200 to 1450, the 2 units are the global tapestry. That's how the world came together. And we will talk, before we get to that, unit 1, we will talk about how the religions created the world, how the world came to be, and how it's just kind of all pieced together. In the year 500 BCE, there was interaction, but it was limited. But by the year 1200 AD or CE, there was all kind of interaction. Now, the interaction was totally in the East. Nothing was going on over there as far as the world. I mean, there were people and they had trade, but they were pretty limited. But over here, the whole world had changed. In 1200 to 1450, Europe and China, India and Indonesia, there was constant trade between them. And there were 3 trade routes that we talk about in AP. The first one was the land route from China to Europe. Can anybody guess what it's called?
The Silk Road.
The Silk Road. And so that was one. And that was early. It started in BC. But by this time, by 1300, it was going great guns. The second one is across the Sahara. And it's called the Trans-Sahara. Makes sense. Across the Sahara. And this was, and because of Mali, there was gold over there. One of the richest men who ever lived, Mansa Musa, was there. And there was a lot of sand, salt, gold, iron, things traded back and forth. But the most lucrative one was over the seas. And this was what we call the Indian Ocean trade. And by the way, just to give you an idea how big the Indian Ocean is, okay, I'm trying to put my hand across it. I can't. Look what happens when I put it across the Atlantic. The Indian Ocean is larger. It's larger than the Atlantic. It's nowhere near as big as the Pacific, but it's larger than the Atlantic. I got to show you something just to give you an idea. Hang on. I got to do this. It'll take me a second to do it. I already opened this, but now I've closed it. I should have. Okay, Google it. Back in the 5, 6, 7, 800s, people wanted goods, and the wealthy people wanted good things in Europe. They went through a dark ages. They had a really rough time. Okay, so here's the world. Okay, so you can see the Atlantic Ocean. You can see, when you're looking at the Atlantic Ocean, you can see Europe, you can see North America, South America, you can see Africa. When you go to the Indian Ocean, you can see, I'm not trying to get it too large. Okay, stop. Indian Ocean is big. Do you see how big it is? But look, you can see Africa, you can see India, you can see China, you can see the Antarctica, but you can see how big it is. Are y'all with me? But watch this. This will blow your minds. Don't get bigger, just smooth. I want to show you the Pacific Ocean. Basically, the Pacific Ocean takes up half of the earth. Do you see that? It is ginormous. There's Mexico on one end and New Guinea on the other side. You can't even see Australia. The Atlantic Ocean is so big, it essentially is half of the earth. Now, you can't tell that on these maps because they divide it, we're Western oriented. Okay, so let me get back to where I was. Okay, so these empires were really growing, and here's what happened. You got a guy in Europe, 1200, he's a king, and he's eating on wooden plates. Now, can you imagine what it's like to eat on a wooden plate? So you pour gravy and the beef on a plate, and then the next day you eat more meat on the same plate. What's going to happen to a wooden plate? It's going to rot. Can you think about the germs? Can you imagine it splintering? And so the wealthy people didn't eat on wooden plates. They ate on metal plates, pewter and things like that. What's the problem with a metal plate?
You can get lead into your food.
Yeah, and it gets hot, but somewhere along the line, somebody discovered the most wonderful plates of all. And what are they? Ceramic. Where do they come from? Yeah, in fact, we call them China. My mother used to have a shelf with the good china on it. Came from China, and especially during the Ming Dynasty, 1600s, they had these incredible, had blue writing and did pictures on it. Well, guess who wanted these? You have a party in France, and Louis XIV has people come in, and they're not on wood. They're not eating on wooden plates. So you got 1,000 people showing up at Versailles, and they're not eating on wooden plates, and they're not eating on metal plates. They're eating on china. And so here's these rich people, and they get there, and this lady looks at her husband, and she says, well, yeah, it's good. In other words, I want some of this. So he says, I'm going to have to get some china. So where does he get it? Well, he's a wealthy businessman, and he says, we're going to have to go get it from China. Well, you could go across the Silk Road and get the china. You can. But can you imagine bringing plates back on a camel? You open them up, they're all broken. You need something a little better. So they say, well, we will go. And by now, they've already figured out that you can go all the way around here. Da Gama came around here and went up to India. And so what will happen is they would send a ship. It would come down this way, go up here. They had to consider the monsoon winds. So they had to go this way, the right way, because the winds were flowing this way in the spring and that way in the winter. So they would come up and they would go through here and maybe go through this area and go to China, or maybe trade with somebody over here who traded with somebody in China, or somebody brought the Silk Road down, and they would buy China and they would bring it back to Europe. And while they were there, they would get some other things. What else was traded over here? Tea. Yeah, from India. That's the British got that. What else?
Spices.
Yeah, pepper. Yeah, salt, spices, and teak wood, and cotton. So this guy over here who's got more money than he knows what to do with, rents out a ship. They put 40 sailors on it. They come all the way around. It takes 18 months to get back. It costs him, in today's terms, $5,000 to send this ship. It comes back and it makes $80,000. So what does he do? He gets 10 more ships. Why? Because gold is important. And people in England and people in France and people in Germany and people in Spain are wanting more pepper, and they're wanting more plates. And so you have a regional, a world trade this way. Nothing over here, but this way. And all of a sudden, Europe is becoming pretty good. And what I mean is, at first, the rich had these. But then the gentry started having them, and pretty soon even the middle class were having them. And we'll see later why. But, and this always happens, what the rich get, eventually everybody gets. I'll never forget in 1968, I went with a friend of mine to his house, and his family lived on Country Club Drive. His daddy had a Cadillac. And we got in that car, and he said, "You're not going to believe this." And I sat in the car, and he said, "Watch this." He put the key in, and he went, and the window went down electrically. I had never seen that. All our windows were like this. Nobody had electric windows except Cadillacs. I remember we just sat there and played with it till his daddy came and made us move, get out of there. But nobody had air conditioners in their cars in 1968. Nobody had electric windows. Now you can't even buy a car without electric windows or without an air conditioner. This is the way it is in all of history. What the rich have, eventually everybody has. The first phones, I remember when I first got a BlackBerry before the iPhones came out, it was like $700. And back then that was a lot of money, and you couldn't finance it. You had to pull $700 out of your pocket. The first flat screen TVs were like $20,000. This is what always happens. So anyway, you've got this trade that happens till 1450, and then the whole world changed. What happened in that time period? After 1450, what happened?
Colonization.
Where?
The New World.
Yeah, the New World. See, what happened in the 1400s, the Ottomans took over the region that we call Turkey, and they limited trade. And so they said, we better go west, and they end up in the New World. So from 1450 to 1750, everything is over here. The trade is just as important. In fact, who came over and discovered it? Who was the first person? 1492? Columbus. And we have a whole trading system that we call the Columbia Exchange. Because when Columbus got here, he picked up some slaves, he brought some things with him, he took some stuff back, and before you know it, there's a whole new trade system going. We call it the Columbian Exchange, where potatoes came from the New World, rice came from the Old World. You got the cowboys and Indians who were riding horses that came from... No. Well, originally Mongols, but ultimately from Arabia. Remember the Arabian horses? And so you had Eastern horses going to the West. You had rice from Vietnam coming to the New World. And so you have this big, huge Columbian exchange. What else did they bring with them that maybe wasn't quite so good? Diseases, yeah. A lot of the Native Americans died out because they weren't immune to the diseases. So from 1750, you have transoceanic, whole new systems where these big empires colonized. And who colonized? Like when we get to South America, who colonized South America?
The French and the British.
No, this is South America, not French and British. Who? Portuguese and Spain, yeah. In fact, they were so arrogant, they had the Pope divide the whole world in a line right here. Spain said, we'll get everything west and you get everything east. And Brazil was in the east, so Brazil is Portuguese. Everything else is Spanish. Because Spain took over everything in the south. Who had the north? Who colonized the North America? British and French. Yeah, y'all said that. British and French. A little bit of Spanish. how did the British take over? What happened? How did they get the French out? They had a war. What was it called?
War of 1812.
No, that was after. This is called the French and Indian War. The French and Indians fought against the British and the settlers. And by the way, that was also called the 7 Years' War, France versus Britain in England, in Europe. And then the French eventually moved up to Canada, and the British got this. So we will talk about that. 1750, something else changed. The whole world changed in 1750. What was it? 1750, what happened? Revolutions. What kind of revolutions? Well, we've got the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And we also have a revolution of thought where Europe, people started thinking about human rights. And you have people like John Locke who started talking about the fact that the consent of the governed, and instead of kings, we start developing parliaments and democracies. So there's a revolution of thought. But then there was an economic revolution. What was it called? The Industrial Revolution changed the world. I mean, so you've got farmers out there just eking out a living, and then somebody develops a machine that can harvest for 20 people. And so then these farmers don't need all these people. So these people move to the city because now there are factories in the city. And instead of one lady making a dress and it takes a week, we've got a factory that can make 100 dresses a day and then 1,000 dresses a day. And by the way, if one dress is made by one person in a week, it's going to cost a whole lot more than if it's made in a factory. So instead of $1,000 for a dress, now it's $2. And when the dress is $2, who can afford it? More people, which develops the middle class. And people start leaving the farms and start living in the cities. And then you've got a whole wealth of problems there. You've got pollution and crime and abuse of people. And that's where Karl Marx shows up and says, capitalism is bad, and he develops the idea of Marxism. So the Industrial Revolution brings a whole new world, and that's 1750 to 1900. And then, because of the Industrial Revolution, we've got more communication, better technology. We're worldwide in what we're doing. Back before 1900, the telegraph was invented, and you can communicate all the way around the world basically instantly. That led to World War I and II, where we really do have big technical wars. But then after the war, USSR and USA fought the Cold War. And then we talk about globalization. Okay, so this is an overview of everything. All right, so that's a pretty good bit. I got just a little bit to go, guys. Okay, so this is a summary of the test. We're not going to look at that, I don't think. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. Okay, let me go back to this. Okay, here's some thinking skills. Developments and processes. That's where we figure out how things happen. What you and I talked about today was looking at history analytically, looking at it with big themes, and we figure out processes. Also, we have to learn how to source things. So let's talk about this. If I were going to look for a primary source for Martin Luther King, what would I consider? What would be some good sources? Letter from Birmingham jail, yes, which was actually a letter. And if I can't find it, I can certainly find the typed letter, and it ended up in a newspaper. Okay, so that's a primary source. Can you think of another primary source for Martin Luther King?
The Bible.
Yeah, because he used the Bible. Okay. What else?
Speech.
When you say speech, what do you mean?
The I have a dream speech.
Okay, but what would you read it or what?
Video.
Yeah, you can actually watch it. We got incredible primary sources. Those are called primary sources. So all of those things that you talk about are primary sources. What about secondary sources? What are some secondary sources about Martin Luther King?
Articles about him
Articles about him and where?
in the newspaper.
In books. But let's say if we want something more contemporary and we look at newspapers.
You could do, I mean, there probably aren't many of them
You can interview people. Hey, you could interview me because I remember the man. I was 14 when he was shot. And I remember watching live the speech from the mall in Washington where he said, "I have a dream." My daddy hated him. My mother loved him. I was a kid. I didn't know. Now, let's just say you read some newspaper articles about Martin Luther King. How would they be?
There'd be a combination of both, probably.
A combination of both what?
Both primary and secondary sources.
No, I'm saying if you read an article about Martin Luther King, would it be positive or negative concerning him? A newspaper article.
Depends on who
It's
wrote
most likely negative.
Depends on what?
Which time?
who wrote it.
Who wrote it? What do you mean? If you read a newspaper article from New York City, would it probably be negative or positive? If you read one from Jackson, Mississippi, would it be positive or negative? Probably negative. If you read it from Meridian, it'd be negative. So the source is not only just looking at where it came from, but what the mindset of that person was. That's called sourcing. And when we look at a document, we consider how accurate is it? How fair is it or neutral is it? So if there's an essay about the Spanish flu, which in 1918, at the end of World War I, it killed more people than World War I did, the worldwide epidemic of the Spanish flu. So if you read an article in it by a doctor and you read an article by a woman whose son was killed by the Spanish flu, which one do you think is going to be more negative about the flu, the doctor or the lady whose son was killed by the flu? The lady, she's emotional. So if you read it, you're going to say, oh, well, her point of view was this. The doctor you think would be more neutral, right? So that's what sourcing is. It's where you evaluate the source. You don't just assume the source is accurate, you evaluate it. So, like for example, we've had 2 presidents in the last 2 years. We still have one of them. And one of them, was that someone knocking? Come in.
I lost my phone. I just want to see if it was in here.
Oh, certainly it wasn't in here because you're not allowed to have it out.
No, it was in my pocket.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead. I'm just messing with you.
I had this period, and then I went to break, and then went to third period. And
Well, does it have that Find My Phone feature?
I don't know.
Have you been to chemistry?
You
No,
could just call it.
It's on silent.
I'll check the
My
cafeteria.
class. I did.
You don't have that little, is it an iPhone?
Yes, sir.
You have iPhone, Find My Phone on it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, we'll look for it.
It's-
Is it like,
Yeah.
looks like this and got a screen on the front?
Yeah, it doesn't have a case on. It's just like regular. But I don't really know where it would be because all I went to was this period, and then it'll learn
Check the
into my
office.
Okay,
third.
what year is it?
It's an 8.
Okay, you need a new one, so you just lose it. Doesn't work that way?
No.
Okay.
Check the office. If it was in the cafeteria.
I checked the office. They said they didn't get it, and they said the middle school goes after me. And I checked the cafeteria, and it wasn't where I sat, so I'm like, I don't really know where it could be.
Did you ask
Okay.
one of the lunch ladies?
No, I guess
So-
it wasn't.
Get another phone and text somebody and say, you idiot, give me back my phone. Thank you for disrupting our class.
Yeah, sorry.
Where was I, y'all? What were we talking about? Okay, so sourcing is important. Knowing whether something is positive or negative is part of what we do. That's a historical thinking skill. And then claims and evidence, how to use evidence, and we'll talk more about this. I mentioned to you yesterday cause and effect, continuity and change over time, and comparison. Essays generally tend to run that way. Okay, so I have for you, this is all in my AP, and so you can look at it, we'll get into it. We are going to look at a document-based question. Here it is. The document-based question, they all look just like this. There's a question, and then there are 7 documents. They all have a box around them, and you can use those 7 documents to answer your question. Okay, here's the question. Someone read it. Can you read it? Let me enlarge it. too large. Okay, it's right here, using the document. Someone read that.
Using the documents and your knowledge of world history, evaluate the extent to which communist movements affected the women's struggle for rights in the 20th century.
Okay, so we got a timeline. What is it? 20th century. That's the 1900s. It's real simple. When they started talking about the BCAD, from 0 to 99 was called the first century. So 100 to 199 was called the second century. So the number of the century is always one more than the years. So we are in the 2000s and we're in the 21st century. Does that make sense? So 1900s is the 20th century. So this is the 1900s. And what's the question asked? What does it say? Evaluate the extent to which
The women's struggle for rights during the communism.
okay, how communism movement affected the women's struggle. Okay, so what is this not about? It's not about the Communist Party. It's not about USSR. Notice it doesn't say the country. It's not about America versus USSR or the Cold War. People, when this came out, actually wrote about the Cold War. Totally missed it. What is the whole question about? Women's rights. Okay? So if we're doing women's rights and we've got those, I erased it. We've got those 6 themes. Which theme are we talking about? No.
Social.
Social, exactly. So now we're talking about social. So you're going to want to do everything relating to social. So if you spend all your time talking about the evils of communism, you're wasting your time. It's very specific. It asks, how did the communist movements, plural, that means not just USSR, but China and Cuba and other places, how did it affect the women's struggle for rights? So what kind of essay is it? Is it comparison, continuity and change over time, or cause and effect? How do you know? Because it's actually got the word effect in it, which is the verb. How did that affect? So it's a cause and effect. So you're saying, to what degree did communism affect, positively or negative, women's rights? Okay? So you got to figure that out. Okay, I'm looking at each of these documents relating to women's rights. And we're going to be talking from 1900 to 1999. And I can tell you, almost every time these documents are chronological. They're going to start from early to late. So let's look at the first one. It's a Russian communist revolutionary. When you look at a document, the first thing you do is look at the caption. It'll tell you about the source. This person is a revolutionary, a member of the Bolshevik government. He's a member of the government. So would you expect him to be positive or negative about women's rights? He's a member of the Communist Party. He's not going to say we're not doing anything. So he's not going to say, yeah, the Communist Party has done a really bad job with women's rights. That's called the point of view. And you will get 1 point on your DBQ for doing that. What time do we leave here?
1 minute.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So what he basically says is, I'm Marxist, and basically women need to become socialist. Didn't do anything related to women's rights. He just said if women would become socialist. Okay, remind me tomorrow. We'll get into this and we'll finish it. And we will get into section 1. Make sure to read RenWeb. Also look at the schedule on the weekly schedule. Okay, any questions? Thank you. I'm sorry it took so long. It's Shep's fault. Wait, who else came in here?
Noah.
It's Noah's fault. Bye.